to Season 4 of GC Chat, a genetic counselling podcast. We're excited to be back.
It's certainly been a while. Our last episode launched in March 2021. What have you been up to since then, Elle?
Well, I've moved into a genomics project management role, so my clinical genetic counselling skills have been really helpful. What about you, Ash?
Moved interstate, had a baby and finished my PhD, and I'm now really enjoying a clinical role that also includes a bit of research.
Great.
We've both been busy.
Definitely. We can't believe that we've had over 58,000 listens from over 100 countries, and the numbers keep increasing. A big shout out to our listeners in the top 10 countries, the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, Singapore, South Africa, China, and India. It's been so lovely to meet others who have found the podcast useful.
GC Chat is an absolute labour of love. We spend our spare time recording, researching, writing and editing these episodes. If you want to show your appreciation for GC Chat, you can do so by buying us a coffee on buymeacoffee.com/GC Chat pod. The link to do so is also in our show notes.
You could also really help us by leaving a review on whatever streaming service you use, such as Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We love your feedback and are always keen to hear what types of episodes our listeners are interested in.
We are absolutely delighted to be here with you for Season 4. We have some great cases this season that challenge the genetic counsellor in some way, and in some situations challenged our preconceived beliefs about how counselling should be done.
For those who are new to this season, today we'll present a new case presented by a genetic counsellor from somewhere around the world. Then, in the next episode, we'll discuss the case again, focusing on our reflections, insights, and the counselling interventions used before presenting a new case.
The aim of the podcast is to facilitate discussion and reflection upon the challenges clinicians may face when providing genetic counselling to clients. All opinions are our own. As always, all cases are de-identified in accordance with Australian and US privacy legislation. Our episodes contain material that may be distressing to some listeners. If you feel you need support, please contact your local crisis centre. Some suggestions are listed on our website, along with our privacy statement and disclaimer.
Today, we'll hear from a counsellor who works in IVF. We asked her to walk us through the case.
So the case that I'm wanting to present is a case that was PGT-M, which is pre-implantation genetic testing for a monogenic condition with IVF. And this particular case, the couple wanted to use PGT-M for an adult onset autosomal dominant genetic condition. So this couple, the male partner's mother had the autosomal dominant genetic condition and had died from the condition. He had been very much involved in her care in terms of palliation and things. And the couple, I guess, together had been through quite a lot watching family members be affected with this condition. There is no treatment or cure for the condition. And so the couple wanted to go through with IVF to exclude embryos, but without him knowing his own genetic status. So this is one of the ways that I think IVF can be used in a really positive way for families in order to preserve, I guess, autonomy of the individual so that they don't have to have testing unless they want to have testing, and they can still avoid passing the condition on to their children. I think it's probably undervalued and underutilized for this particular indication. But thinking about this case, so how we would do it in the IVF setting is we work out, in this case, which copy of the particular affected gene is maternal. So we don't know, I guess, if the male partner is going to develop the condition. We just know which copy of that gene he got from his mum. And so how we do it is we exclude all embryos with the copy of that gene as high risk. So those embryos have a 50% chance of developing the condition, which is the same chance that their father has of developing the condition. So we don't know if they will or won't. And that's, I guess, one of the limitations of this testing is people could be having IVF and don't need it. Because, if he doesn't carry the condition, they didn't need to go through all of this. But if he does carry the condition, we're excluding all embryos that carry that maternal copy of the gene. And so their children won't develop the condition. This couple decided, because there was no treatment, the male partner did not want to know whether or not he was going to develop the condition, but did not want to pass the condition on to children. So they did go ahead with exclusion testing, and they had multiple cycles and got many high-risk embryos. So those embryos inherited the grand maternal copy of that gene. the same as their father. Again, 50% risk of having the condition. They got a handful of low-risk embryos, which they transferred, and none of those were successful in achieving a pregnancy. And then they had a failed IVF cycle. So they came through, her ovaries failed to stimulate. There were no eggs that were collected that cycle. And so this couple requested transfer of one of their high-risk embryos. So that was the referral that came to me. It was this couple would like to transfer one of their high-risk embryos, which has a 50% risk of inheriting the condition that is in the maternal side of the family, the same risk as the father.
She gave us some more background information about the case.
So this couple came through IVF from the beginning to try to avoid passing on the condition. They'd had IVF and a number of cycles over the course of a few years, and then they did try to conceive naturally as well. Once they only had high-risk embryos left, they took a break from IVF, tried to conceive naturally for a number of years, came back for another cycle, which was unsuccessful, and at that point, they requested transfer of the high-risk embryos. If they'd conceived naturally, the chance of that child inheriting the condition is 25%. Because we know that the embryos had the high-risk maternal allele, the chance of them being infected is 50%. So it is higher than a natural conception, but it still isn't 100%. There is still that 50-50 risk.
The counsellor told us about her thought process and what happened during the appointment.
And I went into that genetic counselling session thinking, I'm going to talk them out of doing this. You know, they did this testing for a reason. We generally don't hardly ever transfer high-risk embryos. I guess we pretty much don't transfer embryos that are high risk because the purpose of doing these tests is to avoid passing the condition on and transferring low-risk embryos. And I went into the consult thinking, you know, I'm going to explain this to them and they're not going to want to transfer a high-risk embryo. So I went into the consultation and they were very well informed. They had thought through this in a lot of detail. Some of the ethical issues that I discussed with them were about the autonomy of the child. So given that we know that this child has the grand maternal copy of that gene, same as their dad, if their dad develops the condition or develops symptoms of the condition, that means that their genetic status is automatically revealed. Additionally, because they only have high-risk embryos left, if they had used those embryos for siblings and they achieved more than one pregnancy, all of those siblings have the same grand maternal copy of the gene. So if any one sibling decides that they want to know and has testing or develops symptoms, that actually gives away not only the genotype of the siblings, but also of their dad.
In this next section, the GC mentions the NHMRC, National Health and Medical Research Council guidelines, which are used in Australia. We have provided a link to these guidelines in the show notes.
So there were a lot of issues in that in terms of the autonomy of the children and trying to weigh that up with the reproductive autonomy of the couple. When we think about the NHMRC guidelines, they say that we cannot deliberately select embryos for a genetic condition or a disability. But in this case, this couple haven't done that. They've tried their best to avoid passing on the condition. All they have left is high-risk embryos. And there are other health-related things going on. It was very much they either are able to use their high-risk embryos, which have a 50% risk, or not have children at all. Through the course of all of this, they had met with psychologists, they had contacted disability organizations, they had done a lot of research and were very well informed about what they were asking. They had thought through this in a lot of detail. And really, they were weighing up whether or not to transfer an embryo that was at 50% risk of the condition in the family versus not having children at all.
The counsellor told us more about what happened and the outcome of the case.
So it went from me thinking I'm going to go in and tell them, talk them out of doing this. When they hear all of the ethical issues in terms of the rights of these children to not know their genetic status and how that could be revealed, I thought that they wouldn't want to go ahead. But it was very much the other way around. Once I had spoken to them at length and gone through all of these issues with them, I was then advocating for them. So, they had convinced me that they had thought about this in such a lot of depth. They had thought about how they might tell children. They had thought about when they would tell them. The male partner, we discussed that if he wanted testing now to find out his genetic status, that could potentially solve the problem. If he was low risk, if he didn't inherit the condition from his mother, then all of those embryos were actually unaffected, and that could clarify. The con for that would be that if he found out he did inherit the condition from his mum, those children would eventually develop the condition. It's unlikely they'd be allowed to transfer them. The outcome was that they didn't just meet with me, they met with a couple of doctors as well. And one of the doctors, again, went in there, same as me, thinking they were going to talk them out of it, and ended up advocating as well. So they did jump through hoops. They were able to use their embryos, which was, I think, a very good outcome for them.
We asked the counsellor to explain what carrier mapping was and why it is the preferred lab technique in PGTM.
Yeah, so we do carrier mapping, and most places do carrier mapping as standard now across any condition, so not just for exclusion. So carrier mapping is actually the gold standard for PGTM, full stop, across the world. So if, for example, this couple, we knew that he was affected with the condition, we would test embryos the exact same way. So we would still be excluding the grand maternal allele. We would do the exact same process as we do for exclusion testing. The only difference is we know that it's 100% chance, not 100%, but as close as you can get with testing an embryo. We know that that embryo has inherited the condition of interest, versus in this case, we only knew it was 50-50 because we don't know the dad's status. We don't know if he has it. So it is the gold standard. The reason for that is we get such small amounts of DNA from embryos. So we're sampling 3 to 5 cells at the day 5 stage when the embryo is a blastocyst. And that small amount of DNA is really why we can't do more complex testing on these embryos, at least at this stage. So we're unable to test embryos the same way we would do a predictive test. We don't have enough DNA to do that. So carrier mapping was developed by Alan Handyside. It's been taken up all over the world as the gold standard for PGTM.
We have included some additional references about carrier mapping in our show notes.
As always, we asked the counsellor how she practiced self-care and accessed supervision in this case.
So I think self-care is really important. After this consult, obviously, something that I do quite often if I've had a heavy consult is I step away from my desk. So I'll either go for a walk outside, or in this case, I went and got a cup of tea, which is my usual go-to, just to get away from it and try to process. I debriefed with a colleague immediately afterwards, and then I have discussed the case in supervision. I've also presented the case a few times, and so it does, when you're presenting cases like this, I think hearing other people's opinions on it allows you to process it further. I think I was surprised by my initial reaction to the case when I got the referral that I was going to go in and convince them not to do it. I had made the assumption that they weren't aware of what they were asking, that they didn't understand that these embryos were at 50% risk of this familial condition, and that they hadn't thought through what that might mean when they had gone through so much trouble to avoid passing on the condition. And I was wrong. They had absolutely thought it through.
As you might guess, this case raised several ethical issues that we'll be discussing further in the next episode. As always, please join the discussion on social media with hashtag GCChatPodcast.
Please contact us if you have any feedback, reflections, or questions. We want to hear from people with a range of experience.
We spend our spare time recording, reflecting, and editing these episodes. We'd love for you to buy us a coffee. Details can be found in our show notes. Or leave us a review on wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Thank you for listening.
GC Chat.